All right, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling a pretty fascinating topic.
Yeah,
I know it's something that a lot of you out there have been really curious about,
for sure.
and that is the intersection of quantum physics, free will, and consciousness.
Yeah, big topics.
Big topics. And we're going to be exploring these ideas through an interview with a physicist turned philosopher,
Okay.
which is, a pretty cool perspective to come from.
Really interesting background.
Yeah. Bring some really unique insights to the table. We'll be unpacking some big questions like,
Yeah, like,
does physics rule out free will? Is consciousness a fundamental part of reality or just,
yep.
a byproduct of matter? And is modern physics stuck in some outdated ways of thinking?
Yeah, some big questions there.
Huge questions.
Yeah.
It might sound intimidating, but don't worry, we'll break it all down
Yeah.
in a way that makes sense, even if you don't have a background in physics.
Absolutely. I think these are some of the most intriguing questions in both physics and philosophy.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
So the expert we're focusing on today, they had a pretty unique path.
Okay.
They started with this childhood fascination with light and prisms.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, which I think a lot of us can relate to, right?
Yeah, I mean, who hasn't been, like, mesmerized by a rainbow from a prism?
Yeah, exactly. But for
Yeah.
them, it really ignited this passion for physics and
Yeah.
led them to pursue it at the graduate level.
It's amazing how those, like, seemingly simple things can just spark so much deep curiosity.
Yeah.
And for this person, it led them to, some of the most mind-bending concepts in physics.
Exactly. They talk about encountering these ideas like the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox, EPR paradox for short.
EPR paradox.
Yeah, and non-locality.
Yeah.
And this is where things start to get really, really interesting.
This is where, like, it really starts to challenge our everyday understanding of how the world works. You know, the EPR paradox.
Right.
It deals with this strange interconnectedness of particles, even when they're separated by huge distances,
Wow.
which suggests that measuring the state of one particle can, like, instantaneously
Yeah.
influence the state of another no matter how far apart they are.
So it's like they're linked in this way that goes beyond our usual ideas about space and time.
Yeah, like beyond our normal
Yeah.
intuition.
Totally.
Yeah.
That must have been pretty mind-blowing to encounter as a physics student.
It was for this person.
Yeah.
And it was a real turning point for them.
Wow.
They were so captivated by these, like, mind-boggling implications
Yeah.
that they actually shifted their focus
Okay.
from the kind of the technical aspects of physics
Yeah.
to exploring the deeper philosophical questions about the nature of reality itself.
I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If you're dealing with concepts that are challenging our very understanding of reality,
Exactly.
you start to ask those bigger questions.
You got to go there.
You got to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the biggest questions, of course,
What?
is the question of free will.
Free.
Free will. So does physics leave any room for genuine choice? I mean, if everything is governed by these physical laws, does
Mhm.
that mean we're just automatons just acting out a predetermined script?
It's a question that has puzzled philosophers and scientists for centuries.
Oh, for sure.
And our expert makes this compelling argument that while physics might constrain our choices,
Okay.
it doesn't completely rule out free will.
Okay, so how do they reconcile those two,
Yeah.
seemingly?
Yeah, it seems contradictory.
Contradictory ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they point out that some physicists misinterpret determinism in physics.
Okay.
The idea that, physical laws govern everything
Right.
to mean that humans have no free will.
Okay.
But the expert argues that this is an oversimplification.
Okay.
Physics describes the behavior of matter and energy, but it doesn't necessarily dictate,
Yeah.
our thoughts, our feelings, and ultimately our choices.
So there's a difference between the physical world being governed by laws and our conscious experience of making choices.
Exactly.
Okay.
The expert emphasizes that even within the framework of physics,
Yeah.
there are these concepts
Right.
that suggest a potential for something beyond strict determinism.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, they bring up the work of Werner Heisenberg,
Okay.
one of the pioneers of quantum mechanics.
Right.
Heisenberg described photons,
Uh-huh.
which are particles of light,
Okay.
as making choices.
Interesting.
Now, I know that might sound like we're anthropomorphizing subatomic particles,
Right.
but it highlights the fact that
Yeah.
even at the most fundamental level of reality,
Yeah.
there seems to be this element of unpredictability
Okay.
and perhaps even something akin to choice.
That's a fascinating point. It really
Yeah.
does challenge that idea that everything is predetermined.
Yeah.
Um, So how does this connect to the expert's larger argument about free will?
Well, it opens the door to the possibility that, free will, at least in some form, isn't incompatible with the laws of physics.
Okay.
It suggests that the universe might be more complex and nuanced
Right.
than a simple clockwork mechanism.
Yeah.
And this leads us to one of the most mind-bending ideas the expert discusses,
Okay.
which is the transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics.
The transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics.
Yeah.
The transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics. Okay, that sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I'm not super familiar with that one.
It's not as widely known
Okay.
as some of the other interpretations,
Right.
but it offers a really interesting perspective on how these quantum events unfold.
Okay.
So essentially, the
Yeah.
transactional interpretation, or TI, proposes that these quantum interactions involve a kind of handshake across time.
A handshake across time. Okay, I'm definitely intrigued.
Yeah.
How does that work?
So imagine you're making plans with a friend,
Okay.
right? You send out a text message suggesting a time and a place to meet. Your friend receives that message,
Uh-huh.
sends back a confirmation.
Okay.
That exchange, that back and forth,
Yeah.
is what establishes the plan.
I follow so far.
Okay.
But how does that relate to quantum mechanics?
Well, in TI,
Yeah.
particles are thought to send out these offers and confirmations that travel both forward and backward in time.
Oh.
And when these offers and confirmations match up,
Okay.
a quantum transaction is completed.
Okay.
And that's what we observe as this quantum event.
So it's like a cosmic negotiation happening
Yeah, kind of.
across time to determine which quantum possibilities
Exactly.
become reality.
It's wild.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So instead of that traditional view of cause and effect
Yeah.
happening in this linear fashion,
Right. We're a colleague.
with a cause always preceding an effect,
Exactly.
TI suggests that the future can actually influence the past.
That's one way to think about it.
Wow.
It challenges that ingrained notion
Yeah.
that we have of time.
Right.
Flowing in a single direction.
Right? Like a river.
Yeah. And TI suggests that the relationship
Okay.
between past, present, and future
Yeah.
might be far more intricate
Right.
than we typically imagine.
It's a pretty radical departure from the way we normally experience time.
It is. It is. And while TI doesn't explicitly prove or disprove free will,
Okay.
it opens up these fascinating possibilities.
Like what?
Well, if quantum events involve this kind of time-symmetric interaction,
Yeah.
then it's not out of the question that our choices,
Right.
which have a quantum basis, could ripple backward in time
Right.
as well as forward.
Wow.
Yeah, it suggests that the arrow of time
Okay.
might not be as rigid
Right.
as we tend to think.
So maybe our choices aren't only shaping the future,
Yeah,
but also in some sense shaping the past as well.
exactly.
That's wild.
Yeah, and this connects back to the idea of free will.
Okay.
If the future can influence the past,
Yeah.
then the idea of a predetermined destiny
Right.
becomes much more fluid and less absolute.
So maybe free will isn't about having complete control over the future,
Yeah,
but about participating in this ongoing dance
right.
between possibilities
Okay.
where the past, present, and future are all intertwined.
It's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
It really is, yeah. Of course, not everyone in the physics community embraces
Right.
the transactional interpretation.
Of course, of course.
It's a bit outside the mainstream.
Okay.
But even if TI doesn't turn out to be the
Yeah.
definitive answer,
Right.
it does highlight the fact that there are these alternative ways of understanding quantum mechanics.
Okay.
And that some of these alternative interpretations
Yeah.
could have these profound implications for our understanding of free will and the nature of reality itself.
Absolutely. I appreciate you explaining that. I feel like I'm starting to get a glimpse
Yeah.
of how complex and mind-boggling quantum mechanics can be.
It is. It is.
And I'm also starting to see how it connects to these bigger questions.
Yeah.
About consciousness and our place in the universe.
Absolutely. Quantum mechanics has this way of blurring the lines between observer and observed,
Right.
between mind and matter.
Yeah.
And this leads us to another key point
Okay.
that the expert brings up, which is the so-called hard problem of consciousness.
I've heard that term before.
Yeah.
It refers to the challenge of explaining how subjective experience,
Right.
the feeling of what it's like to be conscious
Exactly.
arises from physical processes in the brain.
Yeah, the hard problem.
Right.
And the expert argues that starting with the assumption that matter is inherently dead,
Okay.
meaning, devoid of
Devoid of any kind of sentience.
sentience or awareness,
Awareness, right.
makes explaining consciousness almost impossible.
Right. So if we start with this premise
Yeah.
that the fundamental building blocks of the universe
Right.
are essentially unconscious,
Unconscious.
then how do we account for the fact that we experience the world subjectively?
Right.
Right, with feelings and sensations and thoughts.
Yeah, how do we get there?
Yeah.
That's the crux of the hard problem.
Right.
And the experts suggest that maybe
Yeah.
we've been approaching it from the wrong angle.
Okay, so what's the alternative?
Well, they propose that instead of viewing consciousness as an emergent property of matter,
Okay.
we might consider the possibility
Okay.
that it's a fundamental aspect of reality itself.
So consciousness isn't something that arises from matter,
Right.
but something that's always been there,
Yeah, always present.
woven into the fabric of existence.
Exactly.
Wow, that's a powerful image.
It is.
It kind of reminds me of some indigenous traditions and spiritual philosophies
Yeah.
that view consciousness as being present in all things,
Right, in everything.
from rocks and trees to
Yeah.
animals and humans.
It's interesting that you mentioned that.
Yeah.
The expert does touch on the idea
Okay.
that some indigenous cultures and spiritual traditions
Right.
have long recognized this interconnectedness of all things.
Yeah.
And the presence of consciousness in nature.
It's as if modern science is starting to catch up
Yeah.
with what these traditions have known intuitively for centuries.
Perhaps. But it's important to note
Yeah.
that this idea of consciousness being fundamental,
Yeah.
it's still quite controversial
Sure.
within the scientific community.
I can imagine it challenges a lot of deeply ingrained assumptions about the nature of reality.
It really does.
But it's definitely a thought-provoking concept.
It is.
And it makes you wonder if our current scientific framework,
Yeah.
which is largely based on a materialistic worldview,
Right.
might be too limited.
That's exactly the point
Okay.
that the expert is trying to make.
Yeah.
They argue that by excluding consciousness from our scientific models,
Right.
we're essentially trying to understand the universe
Yeah.
with one hand tied behind our backs.
And so they're suggesting that we need to expand our definition of science
broaden
to include the subjective realm of experience,
Exactly.
not just the objective realm of matter and energy.
Yeah, bring it all in.
Okay.
They argue that this arbitrary exclusion of consciousness
Yeah.
has led to a kind of stagnation
Okay.
in certain areas of science,
Okay.
particularly in physics.
So it seems like they're saying that sometimes the biggest obstacle to scientific progress isn't lack of data or technology or anything like that.
Right.
It's a reluctance to question our own assumptions.
Yeah, exactly. They argue that the solutions to some of the biggest mysteries in physics
Right.
might already be out there.
Wow.
We're not seeing them because we're stuck in these old ways of thinking.
That would be incredibly frustrating,
This is what-
to have the answers right in front of us,
But there.
but be blinded by our own biases.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder what breakthroughs we might be missing out on.
Yeah, what are we not seeing?
Yeah.
Because we're clinging to a worldview that might be too narrow.
Exactly. Yeah. And the experts call for open-mindedness in science.
Right.
It isn't just about physics.
No, it's much broader.
It has implications for all areas of inquiry, right?
Yeah.
From biology and neuroscience to psychology and sociology.
I mean, if consciousness is truly fundamental,
Right.
like they're suggesting,
Yeah.
it would fundamentally change our understanding of not only the universe,
Right.
but ourselves and our place within it.
Right. It would call into question all of our assumptions about the nature of reality,
Everything, yeah.
the limits of knowledge, even the meaning of life itself.
Big questions, yeah.
Huge, huge questions. It's a profound shift in perspective.
It really is.
And it highlights the importance of being willing to question even our most deeply held beliefs.
Yeah. Even the things that we think we know for sure.
Right.
Got to be willing to question those.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely a challenge to step outside our comfort zones.
For sure.
And consider these ideas that might seem strange or even unsettling at first.
Absolutely.
But as we've seen in this deep dive, sometimes the most groundbreaking discoveries come from daring to look beyond that conventional wisdom.
Yeah, you gotta be willing to go there.
You gotta go there.
Yeah. Well, I gotta say, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gained a whole new appreciation for the interconnectedness of physics, free will, and consciousness.
Me too.
And it's definitely made me want to learn more.
Absolutely. And if you're feeling the same way, I encourage you to check out the full interview
Yes.
with this fascinating expert.
Yeah.
We'll include a link to the YouTube video in the show notes.
Perfect. I'm definitely going to be diving into that interview.
Me too.
And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to continue exploring these mysteries of the universe.
Absolutely.
And perhaps even the mysteries of your own consciousness.
Keep questioning, keep exploring. Yes.
And keep an open mind.
Beautifully said.
The journey of discovery is never ending.
That brings us to the end of another deep dive.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep those minds expanding